She pressed her mother's hand flat against her own chest so Ruth could feel her heartbeat steady certain and said, "I'm going. Don't argue with me." Ruth tried to sit up. The fever knocked her back against the pillow like a hand pushing her down. "Mabel, you can't ride to Red Willow alone. You don't know that, man. You don't know what he'll mom." Mabel picked up the envelope from the nightstand. "If we lose this job, we lose the house. You know that." Ruth's eyes filled. She knew. Mabel kissed her forehead, tasted the salt of fever sweat, and walked out the door before either of them could say anything else that would make leaving harder. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button right now and ring that bell so you never miss a single chapter of what happens next. Drop your city in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. We want to know how far Mabel's story has traveled. Now stay with us because what that millionaire cattleman does when he sees her ride through his gates is something nobody at Red Willow Ranch saw coming. Not even him. The mayor's name was Bess and she was 15 years old and she had not been asked to cover 11 millas in summer heat in a very long time. Mabel asked her anyway. She kept the pace steady, not punishing, but not gentle either, because the sun was already high, and the visiting ranchers Gideon Mercer was expecting for dinner weren't going to wait for anybody. And neither was the rent notice sitting behind the flour tin on the kitchen shelf at home. She'd been staring at that notice for 11 days. 32 pesos overdue. Another 19 due at month's end. The arithmetic of it ran through her. Discover more. Translate. Sports. Video captioning service. Hate the way a song runs through your head when you don't want it. Automatic, relentless, impossible to silence. She shifted her weight in the saddle and let Bess pick her footing on the rougher stretch past the creek crossing, and she made herself stop doing the arithmetic and start doing something more useful, which was thinking about what she was actually going to say when she got there. She'd rehearsed it during the night, sitting up in the chair beside her mother's bed, while Ruth's breathing ran shallow and fast with the fever. She'd gone through 20 different versions of it. Firm but not aggressive. Competent but not arrogant. She needed Gideon Mercer to understand that this was not a charity call. She was not arriving at his door with her head in her hand asking for sympathy. She was arriving with 10 years of work behind her and a dead man's empty chair that she'd been filling since she was 13 years old. She had earned the right to be heard. She just needed him to open the door long enough to figure that out. Red Willow Ranch appeared over the last rise at 10 pulgadas the morning, and Mabel pulled Bess to a walk and looked at it for a moment without letting herself feel anything about it. It was enormous. She'd known it was large. Everyone in Dry Creek knew Red Willow was one of the biggest operations in Wyoming territory. But knowing a thing and seeing it from a rise with the summer heat shimmering off the corral and the main house sitting square and solid in the middle of it all were two different experiences entirely. The house was 2 stories, real lumber, real glass in the windows, a proper porch running the full width of the front. 3 barns she could count from here. A smokehouse, a bunkhouse long enough to sleep 30 men. Corrals stretching east until the fence posts got too small to see. And somewhere inside all of it, a man who didn't know she existed was about to have a conversation he hadn't planned for. Mabel straightened her spine, touched her heels to Bess's sides, and rode down. She tied the mare at the hitching post near the cookhouse, and walked toward the main house without slowing her step, because slowing down was the same as showing doubt, and she could not afford doubt right now. 2 ranch hands near the corral saw her first. She was aware of them. The way you're aware of weather peripherally, constantly, with the particular alertness of a woman who has navigated male scrutiny her whole life. She heard one of them say something low to the other. She heard the other one laugh. She kept walking. The taller one stepped into her path, young, maybe 19, with a gap between his front teeth and a hat pushed back on his head at an angle that was meant to communicate ease and communicated instead that he had a great deal of time on his hands. You lost, miss. No, Mabel said. I'm here to see Mr. Mercer. The gap-toed hand looked at his partner. The partner looked back with a grin he wasn't bothering to contain. Mr. Mercer, the tall one repeated slow and deliberate. The way people repeat something when what they actually mean is that's funny. That's so you got an appointment. I have a letter. He held out his hand. Mabel looked at it. It's addressed to Mr. Mercer, she said. Y ella gave it to him. The smile dropped a notch. She surprised him. She could see at that brief recalibration men did when a woman declined to cooperate with the script they'd already written for her. He stepped aside with a small theatrical sweep of his arm. Macking, she walked past him without acknowledging it. She knocked twice on the front door. Nothing. She could hear voices inside, low and businesslike, but nobody came. She knocked again harder. The door opened. A man in his mid-40s with a thick red mustache and a jacket that had never been near outdoor work looked at her with the expression of someone who'd opened the door expecting a package and found an inconvenience instead. Can I help you? He said flat unwelcoming. You need to speak with Mr. Mercer. Mr. Mercer is occupied. Y ella wait. He looked at her the way Warren Pike she would learn his name later. Looked at everything he considered beneath his employer's notice. Slowly, deliberately, starting at her face and moving down to the patched shoulder seam of her dress, the dust on her hem, the worn heel of her left boot, the plainness of her, and the roundness of her, and the fact that she had clearly arrived here directly from a life that had never had occasion to impress anyone. Who are you? He said. Mabel Hartley. My mother is Ruth Hartley. She was hired to manage Mr. Mercer's kitchen and household stores. She's taken ill. Ebe come in her place. Pike stared at her. Then he laughed. Not a big laugh, not an entertained laugh. The kind of laugh that comes out involuntarily when something strikes you as too absurd to pretend otherwise. Mr. Mercer hired your mother, he said. He did not hire you. Which is why I'd like to speak with him directly, Miss Hartley. He arranged his face into patience. The particular patience of men who've decided the person in front of them isn't worth genuine engagement. Mr. Mercer doesn't receive walk-in visitors. If your mother is unable to fulfill her commitment, she's welcome to write, explaining her situation. Good day. He started to close the door. Mabel put her palm flat against the frame, not pushing, one hand steady against the wood, but she did not move it. Pike stopped. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. She watched him process what was happening, that this woman had put her hand on his employer's door and was not removing it. And she watched him decide she was either very foolish or something he hadn't accounted for yet. Tell Mr. Mercer that Ruth Hartley's daughter rode 11 millas in this heat to speak with him. Mabel said, tell him I'm not leaving until he hears what I have to say. If he decides not to come out after that, I'll go. No argument. But I want him to make that decision himself. 3 seconds of silence behind her. She was aware that the two ranch hands had drifted closer. 2 more had appeared at the barn door. She could feel their attention on her back. The particular weight of people watching something they expect to end badly and want to see when it does. She kept her hand on the frame. Pike held her gaze 1 more second. Then he turned and disappeared into the house. Mabel waited. She breathed through her nose. She kept her hands from shaking by making a conscious decision to keep them from shaking, which was the only technique she'd ever found that actually worked. She'd learned it in merchants' shops when she was 14, asking for credit extensions on her mother's behalf. She'd learned it in conversations with landlords who calculated looking at 2 women alone, exactly what they could get away with. She'd learned it early, and she'd learned it well. The door opened. Gideon Mercer was not what she'd expected. She couldn't have said clearly what she had expected. The stories that circulated through Dry Creek about him had built something in her imagination, something sharper, more angular, a man widow let down to pure function by years of hard decisions. What she got was someone who looked like he'd been interrupted in the middle of working and hadn't stopped to change clothes for it. Colourless shirt, riding trousers with real use on them, boots that had covered genuine ground. It was tall and broad through the shoulders, and deeply tanned dark hair threaded with the first silver at his temples. And his face was the kind of face that didn't announce itself, that you had to look at twice to notice was remarkable. He looked at her, not the way Pike had looked at her, not cataloging, not dismissing the way a man looks at a fence line and immediately starts calculating what kind of work it's going to need. Miss Hartley, he said, Mr. Mercer. She held out the envelope. My mother asked me to give you this. I took it. He didn't open it immediately. Warren tells me you put your hand on my door. I did. That takes something. I didn't write 11 miles to get turned away at the porch, she said. Something moved in his expression. Not a smile, but the first indication that a smile was a thing he was capable of. He broke the envelope seal and read the letter without rushing. When he finished, he folded it once. Your mother writes well, he said. She taught school before my father died. How sick is she? The question hit somewhere she hadn't prepared for. Straight and plain, no softening around the edges. She answered the same way. Fever 3 days. The doctor says rest and water and time, but he can't promise how much time. Gideon was quiet. Come inside, he said. Pike was standing near the window in the office with his arms crossed and his face sealed shut. He didn't speak. Mabel didn't look at him long enough to invite a conversation. There was a wooden chair near the wall, and she pulled it forward and sat before Gideon could fail to offer it because standing across from him like a schoolgirl waiting to be excused was not a posture she intended to hold today. Gideon noticed that almost smile again, brief and controlled. You're not your mother, he said. No, she's who I hired. Yes, and she'll do the work you hired her for. When she's well enough to ride out here, she will. I'm asking you to hold that position by letting me fill it until she can. I don't know you. No, Mabel said. So, judge me the way you judge any new hire, by the work. I leaned back. And if she doesn't recover, not a cruel question, a necessary one. She understood the difference. Then I'll tell you honestly, and I'll thank you for the time and I'll go. I tapped the letter once against his palm. I looked at her steadily, the kind of look that is actually paying attention rather than performing it. Have you eaten today? She hadn't expected that. Of all the things she'd braced for, that one came from nowhere. You'll be fine, she said. That wasn't what I asked. I've eat. No. Come on then. He walked out of the office and she followed him through the hall toward the back of the house where the kitchen sat wide and warm and in the condition of something recently abandoned by whoever had been responsible for it. Pots on the stove with no particular plan. A bowl of cornmeal sitting on the table contributing nothing. A beef joint on the cutting board that had been purchased and then apparently ignored. A girl of about 17 standing near the stove with flour on her apron and the expression of someone holding a position they were not equipped to hold. This is Nell. Gideon said, our cook walked off yesterday. She's been trying to put dinner together since this morning. I looked at Mabel 22 hands tonight. To neighboring ranchers and their foreman. Contract discussion. Mabel looked at the beef joint. She looked at the shelves. She went to the shelves. She read them the way she read everything necessary. Fast complete. Nothing wasted. She opened jars, checked seals, pressed her thumb into the potato bin, lifted the corner of the flour sack, pulled the cold pantry door, and counted what was inside. Dried beans, a full sack. Onions, good. Preserved tomatoes. 8 jars. Salt pork and aging brine. Lard. Baking flour. Wilted parsley still usable. A crate of apples going soft at the shoulders. Not gone, just neglected. She turned around. Maggie. Gideon gestured. Go ahead. She tied the apron, washed her hands, put Nell to work, soaking the beans, moved the beef joint into a pot with onions and salt water. She started the stove. She didn't ask permission for any of it. She worked. Gideon pulled a stool to the kitchen table and sat with a ledger he brought from the office. He opened it and picked up his pen and he worked while she worked and the kitchen got warm and nobody said anything for a while. Then he said without looking up, "What's wrong with my pantry?" She glanced at him. "Beg pardon. You spent 2 minutes on those shelves and I counted 6 different expressions." So he looked up. "What's wrong with it?" Mabel set down her spoon. "The tomatoes are losing their seal. They've been stored somewhere with temperature swings and the lids are compromised. 3 of those 8 jars will be bad by next week. She moved to the flour sack. This was opened and left loose in Wyoming summer. That's an invitation. You have passed in it inside a fortnight. She pointed at the potato bin. Those are stored too close to the onions. They're shortening each other's life. Gideon's pen had stopped moving. The beef joint, she continued. That's an expensive single cut. 3 smaller cuts from different parts of the steer would have fed the same crew for a third less money. And your salt pork brine is old that should have been restocked 2 weeks ago, maybe 3. Silence. How do you know all that? I said, we couldn't afford to waste anything. Mabel said, when every penny counts for the week's food, you learn fast what kills it early. You've been running your household since I was 13. My father died when I was 12. I held her gaze. That's 10 years of this. Yes. I looked back at the ledger. He didn't write anything for a long moment. Just sat with the pen in his hand and the scratch of it absent. And the only sounds were the stove and the slow bubble of the beans starting to move. Then what would you do with those apples? Bake them, Mabel said immediately. Sugar, cinnamon. I saw some behind the lard tin. Serve them after the beans and beef. The visiting ranchers get a proper dessert and you've saved what most people would have thrown to the pigs. I looked at the apple crate. I looked at her. All right, he said. She turned back to the stove. At 6:00, 26 people sat down to slow braised beef and onion broth beans seasoned with salt pork and preserved tomato, fresh cornbread, and baked apples sweetened with the cinnamon she'd found behind the lard tin. The visiting ranchers ate without talking, which was the highest compliment a working meal could receive. One of them, a gay-bearded man named Colbert, looked down the table and said to Gideon, "Where'd she come from?" "Dry Creek," Gideon said. "You keeping her?" A pause. "Sort, but they're working on it," Gideon said. After dinner, the hands filtered out and the ranchers moved to the front room for their contract talk. Mabel and Nell cleaned the kitchen. When it was done, Mabel took off the apron, folded it over the chair back, and walked out to the porch because she needed air and a moment to think about what came next. She heard the screen door behind her. Gideon came and stood at the railing. He didn't look at the sky. He looked at her. "You need to get back to your mother," he said. "Yes, I'll have a hand ride with you. Road gets dark past the 3rd mile. You don't need." "I know you don't," he said. "I'm offering it anyway." She pressed her lips together. "Thank you." He reached into his jacket and held out an envelope. She looked at it without taking it. "That's that?" "Week's pay. Sammy has agreed with your mother." "You haven't agreed to work a week." "You have," he said. "Call me back tomorrow morning and every morning after until Ruth Hartley is well enough to make this right herself." She looked at the envelope. She thought about the rent notice, the mayor's shoes, the medicine. She did not reach for it yet. "You need to be clear about what this is," she said. "Go ahead. This is work. I'm paid for what I do, not helped, not taken in, not given anything out of sympathy." She looked straight at him. "The day you think you're doing me a kindness instead of paying me for what I've earned, I want you to tell me and I'll go." Gideon looked at her for a long moment. "That's the plainest employment condition anyone's ever put to me," he said. "Is it acceptable?" "It is." She took the envelope. She was on the second porch step when he spoke again. "Miss Hartley," she turned. "Your mother's letter says she raised you alone for 10 years." His voice was even. She didn't give herself enough credit. Mabel stood with the envelope against her side and the Wyoming night coming in around the edges of everything. And she let that sentence land where it needed to land, which was somewhere she hadn't thought to guard. "I'll tell her you said so," she said. She rode home with a ranch hand at a respectful distance behind her. The sky above was enormous and dark and full of stars that didn't care about any of it. Base moved steady beneath her. The envelope was tucked inside her dress where the letter had been that morning. When she got home, Ruth was awake, barely, eyes clearer than they'd been at dawn. The lamp on the nightstand turned low. Mabel sat on the edge of the bed. She put the envelope on the quilt between them. Ruth looked at it, looked at her daughter. What did you do? I went to Red Willow, Mabel said. I cooked dinner for 26 people. He told the richest man in Wyoming what was wrong with his pantry. She met her mother's eyes and I got you your job back. Ruth's hand found hers. Mabel, don't. Mabel's voice came out steadier than she felt. Don't say thank you. You'd get better. He had to be back there by sunrise. Ruth closed her eyes. Mabel sat with her until the breathing deepened and slowed into real sleep. And then she kept sitting there because she wasn't ready to stop yet. She thought about Warren Pike's laugh at the door. She thought about the two ranch hands and their private joke.